All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our first session for this afternoon. I hope you had a great lunch and a great first day and a half of Exoticon Live. My name is Derek Bullebrecht. I've had the pleasure of working at Exotify for about 4.5 years in a variety of different functions. Really where I've had experiences first on the customer success side, working with our clients in North America and around the world to help them get the most value out of their investment in frontline learning. At the same time, I work today with our international partners, which we have in many different countries, like in the United Arab Emirates, South Africa, Mexico, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, and other markets like that that represent us in those markets. And often I'm involved with them as they're looking to prospective organizations as they evaluate frontline learning technology. So I think I'm well served to speak to some of this topic, because when I was given this as a session, it was really around an interest of two different themes. So I know there's a variety of people on the webinar today. Some of you might be in a position where you're evaluating bringing in frontline learning technology like Exotify or another solution, and you're working to build the case to do so, right? On the flip side, you might have already made such an investment, and you're looking at how do you prove the value of the investment that you made? How do you show that learning is making a real impact? And you're looking for some tools and techniques to do that. And if we think about this historically, this has often been challenging because we have limited data sets. You know, as the title says, beyond test scores, completions, what else is at our fingertips? How else can we frame value? So these are the themes that we're going to explore today. Similar to the other sessions that you would have been on, we are going to have a chat function going throughout. So please feel free to jump in with questions throughout. We're going to be answering in the chat as we go forward. With that, let's get this show on the road. So our first question, as I mentioned, is how do we make the case for frontline learning if we don't already have an investment in a technology of this sort? So there's a framework I've been introduced to about a month ago that I really like, that I thought I'd use for this session, because it encapsulates a lot of the different experiences I've had here. And I think it's a nice model that you might be able to use as you structure what are those different value drivers for you. So if we start, you might be looking at bringing in a solution to really support the fundamentals. Perhaps COVID illuminated that, you don't have a current way to communicate with your front line. They don't have email, and maybe a lot of it's informal right now. So you need something that you can use to communicate with the front line. Maybe you don't have a good method right now to track your compliance training, and that's a mandatory thing, obviously, you need to do for government purposes. So maybe there's some fundamental aspects that you need to do, and you're looking to bring that in. Another way to think about it is reducing time and cost. So are there efficiencies in the business that you could find by bringing in an investment of this sort that could offset or be even further than that, right? The third would be, are there organizational initiatives that exist right now that you could connect an investment in frontline learning to? Is there something you're trying to change in your customer experience and your sales approach, whatever that is? And finally, can't see it with my picture there, but delivering strategic value. And we've seen a lot more of the bigger deals that we've had come into Exotify in recent years have been more connected to some of this third and fourth level, where again, there's a much stronger connection to the transformation and the C-suite priorities for a business and how that connects back to learning. So if I break these down into a little bit more detail here, you'll just see some examples I've included. So if we think about supporting the fundamentals, again, I mentioned compliance, I mentioned communication. Another one might be that you want to ensure employees can access job aids easily. So there's fundamental aspects here that you want them to have. A second one, again, could be reduced time and cost. So some examples here, maybe right now, every time you train your staff, let's say you're in a retail environment, you have to take them off the floor into a training room and someone else has to cover for them. So, you're paying for their time, but obviously that's a cost. So if there's a way that you could integrate training into their shifts through microlearning, maybe that's a way that you can reduce some of those costs. A second one might be, we see in call center environments a lot, there's a very lengthy onboarding process. So if you break that down, if there's a way you can make that more efficient, get people on in their roles faster, that also has a savings to it. And a third one could be, right now, perhaps you build all of your training content from scratch. So maybe if you have access to a third-party library of content that you can leverage that's relevant to your business, that reduces the internal cost to develop those sort of things. So if we move to the third level now we're starting to get into some of these metrics, right? So maybe there's a metric or initiative that's really important to senior leadership right now. Maybe that you just launched a loyalty program. We had a client out in Asia do this recently, and they wanted to make sure that everybody was on side with that, pushing it to clients, and knew how to effectively drive that, right? So that might be a very specific initiative, whereas a larger strategic value area might be, as a company, they want to have a more agile, adaptable workforce. So groups, employees that are able to quickly change as the world changes around them, which is clearly the environment that we're in today. So there might be other organizational initiatives that fit into that, but that is the broader theme that they've connected their investment to. Now, similar here, maybe there's a larger initiative around driving a safety culture across the business, right? So you want to ensure that people are living and breathing safety. They're talking about it. They know what to do at the right times. So that's a broader initiative, whereas if you're trying to reduce safety incidents, that can be one component of that. Maybe slips, trips, and falls is a challenge, so you're going to create a customized training program to deliver on that. But again, there's a broader theme around safety culture. And again, a final one here might be, maybe as leadership, you want to instill a mindset that no matter what store or location you go to, if you talk to an employee, they're going to give you a similar level of customer experience, a consistency, a standardization of excellence, let's say. So that's a broad theme, of course, too. Now, can you break that down to some more organizational initiatives? Maybe NPS is a very specific metric that you track and that you want to see some improvement in. So that might be an area you focus on. So again, this is a template. Again, you could customize this, and we're going to give you access to that at the end of the session if there's some that are more specific for you. I've just thrown a few on here as an example. But as you think about this, there's going to be different people that care about some of these different areas. So one of the questions I have is, as you're building the case for investment, who are you talking to? Right? So, I've read a lot of books on this in terms of deal making, and what I often hear is, the research suggests that between 5 to 7 people are involved in a typical purchase in an organization. Now, that again will vary based on the size you're talking about. So if you're trying to bring something in, who are those people that you need to get on board? And what's important for them? So I'd encourage you to think about, reaching out to them, picking their brain on what are those most important objectives. And you could use a template like this to start filling it out so that you can make a case that covers a number of different priorities, initiatives, savings, or increases in value for your organization. The other piece too that I reference on this as well is I often have found, and we've seen with at our company at Exonify, that a lot of the deals that we work with, L&D is definitely very involved in that, but also the line of business. And the way we think about the line of business is, if you're a contact center, who do all those people that work in the contact center report up to, and what's important for them? Or if you're in a bank, in a retail banking situation, who do all those retail banking associates report up to? And if we can get alignment with that person, what's important to them, what are the things we're trying to drive, and then with learning and development, we bring those two together, that's a powerful combination to move some of these things forward. So that being said, let's say now in our second scenario, you've made this investment. So how do you show the value of this investment? So if we think back to this, again, you could use something like a color-coded system. I've seen this used in other organizations where, again, they will track some of these metrics or objectives that they have and then see how well they're doing on those to help focus activity. So broadly, that's a way you could approach it. If we look at how you actually could do this, there's a few different ways. So if I think of some examples I've worked with, I had a client, a home decor retailer a few years ago, where they were actively using our system for normal training, but historically they had done compliance in a different system. And it was always a bit of a hassle to get people to do that on time. It would take months and lots of managers nagging people to do that. Well, they brought that compliance training onto Exonify. They use the certification feature that we have, and which triggers it above the employees' daily training activities. And what they saw is they were able to get 80–90% of their employees doing it within the first 2 weeks they released it. So again, similar to before, they were getting it done, but they were basically taking a lot of responsibility off of the managers and making that more efficient. So that was a win. It doesn't necessarily have a dollar figure associated with, but that was a win for them in supporting the fundamentals of what they need to do as a business. So just one example there. Second would be broadcast or communication, as I mentioned. So I've seen that, when we're talking about frontline staff, a lot of them don't have email access. And before COVID, a lot of our clients were using some of the communication features we had. But as COVID hit, a lot of them suddenly realized they need to get a lot of information quickly out to staff, both on health and safety, on if there were layoffs and what the procedures and policies would be around that, communication from leadership to reassure staff during that time. And the ability to get that out quickly was a win. And I had a lot of customers comment on that. That was a great functionality for them and a win for them. The third would be just generally on the level of activity. So again, we've talked at the kickoff with the title of this session is kind of beyond test scores and completions. So what other data can you gather that shows the level of training activity going on, right? So the number of questions that are answered, the number of sessions of activity. Gathering some of that can be a powerful tool just to speak to the level of training activity that is going on. So those would be some of the fundamental areas and ways that I've just given a few examples of how you could speak to that. Now, second is, again, reducing time and cost. So what are some ways you could do that? Well, I have a few examples here. So first would be, I worked with a toy retailer a few years ago, and I remember going into one of their stores, and what we learned there was that there was a compliance process that was causing them a lot of challenges. Basically, all of the staff had to come off the floor for 2 to 3 hours one time per year and complete a 70-page document. And it just was not a lot of fun. The employees didn't like to do it. The managers got annoyed with it. They'd order pizza to try to make it better, but they're filling out the 70-page document, answering questions, just was not a good experience. So we took a look at that document and said, okay, is there a way together we could break that down into more manageable bite-sized chunks? And so the team there rolled this out. They put out monthly certifications, and they were able to reduce that 3 hours to 1 hour per employee and reduce the amount of paper consumption as well. And with each of those, if you calculate the hourly value of an employee's time and also the paper costs of that, you can start to get some tangible financial numbers there. Another one I'll reference is around onboarding time. So I mentioned that's often a challenge. And what we've seen, in some of our call center deployments is that, if you think about now, if you call in, let's say you have a problem with your cell phone and you call into a call center, the person on the other line has to know a lot of different information. And so that's a reason why the onboarding process is so long. But let's say there's a feature or a device that isn't used as frequently, it's not as popular. But you call in asking about that. Now, maybe that was covered on day 10 of onboarding, but that person has now maybe been in onboarding for 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever that is, has now been in the job, answering calls, getting a lot of common questions. But then these other questions come up that they got on day 10 and suddenly they don't remember, right? So what we saw with some of our clients is they would start to embed reinforcement into those early days and therefore could reduce that amount of in-person onboarding time. And so cut that down by several days. And if you can get people on the floor faster, that is a very clear, tangible financial impact. So again, just another example there. Two others I'll just reference. One, and sometimes this is different culturally around the world. In the Middle East, a big thing that I've seen is that in many cases, organizations have jumped to generations. So they might have been doing in-class training and jumped straight to maybe digital learning, skipping more of the LMS type of solutions. And so what we've seen is the numbers that often resonate there is the costs associated with how much those in-class training sessions cost. So what some of our partners have done is actually calculated, well, based on all the digital learning, the micro learning that your employees are doing, this is the actual amount of days that this would have been the equivalent of in person, and actually shown those how much dollar savings and time savings were associated with that. So again, a bit different, but it's very culturally relevant there. Another one that we saw was a big grocery retailer that we've worked with that was looking specifically at some of their job aids and how they can make that more efficient. So some organizations will have books, manuals in a back room, and so a staff associate might have to walk to that room to get that job aid, which may or may not be up to date. So by enabling that on devices where they're working, you save that period of time walking and ensuring that that's actually up to date. So that has a time savings as well for those staff members. So again, just a few examples, but if you think about some areas of your organization where you could reduce some of that time and cost, again, that's a measurable area that could be a win for your business. So the third area now, which is about supporting organizational initiatives. And any of our existing clients will be familiar with this. If you're new to us, again, this would be a new framework for you, but I'll just go over it briefly. So what we see is if you're thinking about any of those metrics that we talked about before, there's a way that you can start breaking that down into tangible training. So if we take an example right now, for many of you, you're not able to have as many people. If you're in retail, you're not able to have as many people in your stores, right? So the thought is if you have customers that are coming to your stores, they have a higher likely intent to buy, right? They've made that effort to go there in unsafe times and they're in your store. So the theory is, okay, well, we should have higher conversion rates. But what do we need to do effectively in order to do that? And that's where we can start breaking that down. So in your planning process, you can make sure that your content is aligned here by first breaking this metric down into some of the behavior changes you need. So maybe you have a new way that you need your employees to engage with customers from a safe distance. Maybe they need to speak with them in a different way. Maybe there's other health and safety concerns at play here. So whatever those things are, let's identify those specific things that employees need to do differently or do consistently. From there, we can break that down into topics or content areas. So maybe there's customer experience training that needs to be provided, product knowledge training, safety training. And from there, we can then break that down into an engagement plan. How do we actually get these employees to do that sort of training? So on the flip side, if we're then live and you've been using a tool for a while, you then want to start to see, can you start to measure contribution to that overall metric? So it might be different if you're looking at a different system. I'm familiar with Exonify, so I'll use some of our, the way we measure different things. If we're looking at engagement, we often are looking at, can we get employees participating, 80% at least of them, 3 to 4 days per week for about 5 minutes per day, right? And if we get that, we know that we're building a habit in those employees to engage in training. And in our case, the brain science shows that as you're engaging with training on a repeated basis, answering questions repeatedly as reinforcement kicks in, your knowledge is going to improve because you're more familiar with the concepts. So we're able to measure things like baseline knowledge. So what's the initial knowledge someone has? You provide a training on the new customer experience in COVID. What initial knowledge level do they have on that? Then as they continue to answer questions on that topic area, does their knowledge improve and by how much? So we can start to get accurate levels in terms of the knowledge levels. So real time, we can know, okay, our current knowledge level of employees for these new COVID customer experience practices is at 70%. That's a concern. We'd like to get that higher so that we have greater confidence it's going to lead to the behavior change. Now, assuming that this is the right content, what we're then going to start to see is behavior change. And there's a number of ways that that can be measured. In our tool, we do have an observational tool that you can actually have managers do observations in. There might be other ways you do it. Maybe you have a mystery shopper program where you have people go into the stores and pretend to be customers that are evaluating your staff. Maybe you have observations done, call audits at the contact center. Maybe you have a manager walking around a warehouse to ensure that your staff are being safe on the job and marking that down. Whatever that is, there could be a number of different ways. And ultimately, the big result of this is we want to drive an actual business metric. So like conversion rates here, we want to see conversion rates go up. So as we can see, as we go through these different levels, once you're live, you can start to measure how you're doing relative to that goal that you have. Now, the question, of course, that comes is, well, what percentage of that is from training? How do we actually define that? So there's a few different ways that I've approached this in the past. The first one, with a lovely picture here, would be a bit of a before and after comparison. So let's say you launched a program. What do those conversion rates look like after you've done the training versus before? Now, this can be effective early on where maybe you didn't have something in place before and you do after. So for executives, a before and after comparison may make sense. Now, what's the challenge here? you're probably thinking about it, which is there's a number of other factors probably at play. There's a number of other initiatives, external market conditions that could impact those results. So that's the challenge of that type of analysis. But again, it could be used, just have to call it that, those assumptions. Now, the second approach here is what we internally call a business value analysis, which is really looking at correlations. So the idea here would be, let's say you're a retail environment. We're going to look at the quota achievement of your stores over the last year, and we're going to overlay that with those different stores' engagement and training. So which stores have been most active, which stores have been least active. And what we want to see there is what's the difference in actual quota achievement, right? So it's more of a correlation analysis, but we're just trying to see what are those differences at play. I've done this with a number of clients. I had one telecom retailer, we did this, and we saw actually when we did that the top 10% of stores that were most active in training had 24% higher quota attainment than the bottom 10% of stores. And the L&D team that created this was ecstatic and was then showing this to the head of stores, who got even more behind Exonify at that point, because they could see, hey, as people do their training, we have a better chance of hitting our numbers. So anytime you can get a metric like that, that's powerful to get those people on board. I'm talking a lot, so a little water break. The next one here is really about big data. Now, this is something, of course, big buzzword. You've probably been in lots of webinars that talk about that. An evolution we've seen with learning technology is, again, if you think about some older platforms that might only have completion data, test score data, it's not a lot of data at a fundamental level. Whereas anytime we want to have big data to run machine learning, to give us predictions or understand what's leading to what, we need bigger sets of data. So, that might be a question as you're evaluating different technologies. Do you have big data? Now, with Exonify, I've been very involved with this in the last 2 years or so. We have a platform called Impact. And we're able to ingest the business data from our clients, but also the learning data. Now, the learning data is important here because in our case, our average statistics, again, is about 3 days of participation per week, 5 questions a day. So let's say, you have an employee, again, 3 days per week, 5 questions a day, that's 15 questions per week. Per month, 60 questions per month. Per year, 720 questions per year. Now, in each question, there's 10 individual data points. I won't go into those now, that's a separate session, but that's 7,200 data points per employee per year. So if you equate that across your organization, that's a lot of data. And so we're able to ingest that with your business data. So we might look at your sales results versus your targets that you had. We feed it through machine learning, and we're able to understand what impact the content that you've developed has had on those business results. So you can start to actually understand some of that percentage attribution. Similarly, we'll use that to help make predictions so that you can take actions proactively in the future to improve some of those results. So that's another way, and it's very powerful, lots of cool things you can do with it. It is often using different terminology or concepts that you might not be as familiar with. So a suggestion I always make is, definitely read up on some of these concepts, because you want to be able to speak about it confidently internally to some of your stakeholders. Whoa, but Derek, how do I get this data? Good question, Slide. That is a great question. So often I do hear questions about, hey, I'd love to do this, but how do I get this data to run these sort of analyses? So there's a few approaches that you can take. I had one client one time where we were working to get Impact set up for them. And in order to do that, we need access to their business data. Now, there's often sensitivity with sharing, business information in terms of sales results, those sort of things, not only externally, but also even internally. So our content was having some difficulty getting access to that. So what we did is we had a meeting with their head of stores, and we took them through the power of what the tool could do and got them on board with that idea. And then the next day, the data was sent to us. So I think that's one thing you can think about. You don't want to put out a data request without context, because it can just be seen as another request. Put out the why behind it, and ideally, engage a senior stakeholder so that they can help push it internally. A second piece is I'm seeing a growing number of organizations that have data analytics teams. So if you are fortunate to have a team like that, definitely engage with them. Talk them through what you're trying to do, and they might be able to help you quite a bit going through that analysis and providing some coaching and support on that. The third area is, as well, is aligning on these metrics up front. So rather than later in the process identifying, hey, it'd be cool to look at the impact on sales, it'd be great when you're starting out developing your training to identify those metrics, and also to start the conversation internally about, can you get access to that data, right? So that you're structuring your analysis appropriately and building the training content appropriately to metrics that you can actually pull. But Derek, another question, how do I get everyone on board with my analysis? Well, good question, Slide. That is a great question. So let's say you've gone through this process and you've built this analysis. How do you actually get everybody on board? So there's a few things I would suggest, 3 tips here. The number one would be ensure that your metrics are the right ones. So even in the table that we looked at before, there's a number of different metrics that you can look at, right? And do analyses on. You don't want to spin tires though. So I would suggest, having a conversation with your senior stakeholders and really ensure that those are the correct metrics or the most important ones to focus some analysis on. The second piece would be engage them throughout the process. So talk to them about the way you want to go through the analysis. Are you going to look at it before and after? Are you going to do a correlation? Are you going to use a big data tool like Impact? Are you going to do something else entirely? Get their coaching on that. Midway through the analysis, check in again. Here's the way we're approaching it. Get their feedback on that. So by the time you do a final presentation, they feel that they've been a part of the process and are more willing to support it. The third one as well, I would say, is if you're presenting this internally, if some of the concepts are newer to you, especially if you're using some of the big data technologies, definitely practice that presentation, get familiar with it, and also call it any assumptions that you may have made, right? So if you don't want to overstate the impact either and lose credibility. So calling that out can help show the rigor behind any analysis that you've done. And if you're working with us, we can support you on any of those areas as well. So we've talked again about the fundamentals. We've talked about reducing time and cost. We then talked about focusing on those organizational metrics and doing specific analyses to see progress on them. The fourth one, and the ultimate puzzle, I suppose, is delivering strategic value. So with those examples I gave before, that's a difficult one to say. How do you measure if you're getting a consistent customer experience in every store? How do you measure if you're developing a safety culture? So again, I think it does connect to some of those metrics. So you might have a number of metrics or initiatives around that. And some of it is also anecdotal, right? How does leadership feel when they go into a store, when they speak to someone on the phone or whatever that may be? Do they get a sense that is actually the culture that's being permeated, right? And does that match with the metrics with what they're telling us as well? So it is a bit subjective and objective at the same time. So in summary, again, this is a template. Again, I've thrown some examples in here, but it's definitely something that I'd encourage you to take a look at. What we're going to do in terms of takeaways is you're going to see on this last slide a link that you can access to get a template here. So it's going to have this completed one and a blank one. So I definitely would suggest you take a look at it, maybe fill it in with some of those, and that might be a way to start building that case internally, or alternatively to identify value achieved, or to identify which initiatives or analyses that you should look at as you're looking to prove value internally. The second is, again, based on what I said, definitely talk to a broad range of people in your business. So if you're in L&D, talk to the business stakeholders, talk to different people so that you can understand what are the most important things and that your training programs are aligned to that. So that ultimately you're hitting some of these broader objectives in addition to fundamental programs that you need to have in place. And the other one I say too is consistently reevaluate what success criteria are most important. So maybe I've seen clients that have bought Exonify because they had a specific problem with safety and they're trying to find a way to instill safety culture, but over time, other priorities came up. And so, the use of the tool started to be shifted in those areas. So constantly have those conversations, understand the strategic priorities, and try to keep shifting so that learning is viewed as a strategic driver of those initiatives ultimately. So with that said, I hope that was valuable. Try to give some examples today. And again, you'll see this checklist here that you can click on. We're going to share it with you guys as well. And with that, I really hope you had a good session today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. And again, if I haven't met you before, I hope to have the chance to meet in the future. And with that, thank you.